This week we're going to dig a little deeper into the finance plans, the various elements of finance plans, the various elements and how they are resulting into profits, and we're going to see how they balance out in order to optimize profits. I leave you a project at the end of the week that you can evaluate and then send to me in order to test your understanding of the material. What an investor wants to see when he looks at a project is not dissimilar to what you have to do when you put a project together. The various elements, including gap financing, mezzanine equity distribution financing, as well as crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, tax credits, and other finance elements, play a very important role in creating a balance that is essential in order to create profits. What is a commercially viable project? Any project can be commercially viable as long as it knows where it's best released, meaning it knows its marketplace, it knows what it's produced for. As long as you keep in mind your target audience and your budget in combination with your marketplace, you will have a commercially viable project. Sales estimates take the next step, because sales estimates are done in order to globally distribute a picture or a television series. Global distribution means selling all the rights available to the entire world. Sales estimates will tell you exactly, or I should say projecting where exactly in what country you can earn a certain amount of money selling the distribution license. The sales estimates are done in a way that you can see low, medium, high projections, and banks will usually go with the low, and so should you, not just for yourself but also for your investor. And as we mentioned before, the low estimates should be anywhere from 70 to 75% in order for any project to be able to be commercially viable. Pre-sales play a very important part in that they are actually validating your projections. Let's say, for example, you made pre-sales in Germany and you're projecting 10% for Germany and you're selling and all you get is 5% for Germany. You automatically know that the level of your projections is likely incorrect because the sales you're receiving are lower, they show lower values. Obviously you can say no to those suggested pre-sales because you have the right to do that, but in essence what it tells you is that your projections are too high and you're going to have to revisit them with your sales agent. Project elements and estimates help establish your finance plan. What does that really mean? What it means is your projections and pre-sales become part of your finance plan. If your pre-sales are low, other finance elements are going to have to be higher. If your pre-sales are high, then you can have lower equity, lower bank loans, etc., etc. However, if you don't follow a certain balance in this kind of puzzle, I should say, then your profits are going to be affected. In this week, we're going to run a few scenarios where we change the finance plans and the elements, and then you can see how this actually plays out in your profits. You will then understand how important it is to balance your finance elements out, in which case you will arrive to what is called a solid finance plan. Let's talk about the sales agent that you should ideally attach to your project. Well, ideally is someone who sees and has the same vision of the project than you do, who supports the package you envision and whose numbers project on that package and on the genre and on the story and on the script in a way that suggests this is going to be a profitable project. Sales agents who have done something similar, who've sold similar projects, are usually the first address for you to go to, but if they sell a lot of projects, then you got to be a little careful because it's going to be hard for them to manage many projects. You want someone who's really attending to your project in a way that it has the deserved attention in any of the markets. Doesn't matter if it's American film market or if it's the Cannes Film Festival. You want someone who doesn't go with 25 projects to each of those festivals and then juggles them around. When I talk about pitfalls of distribution, what I'm talking about is agreement elements that are done without really looking closely at their outcome, in essence. So distribution is where you make your money, and in our essential agreements week, we're going to talk about the absolute, the real detail as to what terms they're going to be in there. But for now, I would like to quickly talk about the sales agency agreement, because it relates to distribution, and let you know that there's two main points you should always watch out for. One is, do not agree to work with a sales agent who is not willing to use a collection agent. We're going to learn later why that is. I'm sure you have some kind of an idea already. The second point is, you want to have a sales agent who actually stands behind the projections that they gave you. And what does it mean? Well, they stand behind it in a way that they tell you, I'm willing to enter into a performance clause with you which says I'm going to reach these projections in this amount of time. This is going to be a sales agent who really is going to step up and do what he actually projected he would do. That's the kind of person you want. With someone like this, you will be able to avoid some pitfalls in the distribution arena, and you will be able to optimize your profits to the best possible way. It's a very, very dry subject matter to think about all the numbers and the changing economies and all these background research elements one has to do in order to figure out if one's project makes actual sense and has a chance of profitability. But it is important, sorry about this, it is important that you think about your project really carefully and figure out what kind of project you're making and who you're making it for. I am always saying, if you are, the film festival type who really likes art house movies, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you make them for a price, and as long as you know that you're going to have to deal with sales agents and distributors who are buying in that marketplace, you're perfectly fine. If you're doing a movie or a TV show for a global audience, meaning an audience that's all over the world, and buyers who are buying licenses for their countries, then you have to kind of cater to them. You're not really catering to the actual audience that is watching your movie or watching your TV show. You're actually catering to the buyer who is then showing it to their audience in their country. So it's a little bit of a different thinking process, and it is important to research the buying power of these countries, the economy of the country, and kind of the taste what they like over there. It is, of course, easier done when you sit down with a sales agent and even go to the international festivals like Cannes and American Film Market, etc., etc. You get a feel for what's being sold there and what gets a little bit of buzz. But you're going to have to do the research, and you're going to have to monitor each and every element in your project, the projections, the sales estimates, the various finance components, in order to make sure that you are going to end up in a profitability arena with it. The Hollywood Reporter issued a while back this sales projection estimate paper, which basically gives you an idea as to what these various countries pay, what kind of the ranges, what they pay for a license, and how much it is per the budget. So if you have, let's say, a $6 to $12 million budget and you're selling it in France, Germany, Austria, Greece, etc., they're telling you can get anywhere between $400,000 to $850,000. This sheet is obviously just a basic guidance. It really varies and it changes all the time because the economy in the world changes, but it is a basic kind of orientation paper that can kind of help you where you are with your own project when you put something together. So take a look at this and kind of study it, and it gives you a little bit of an idea where your sales estimates would be and could be. Well, the distributors / buyers who are buying the rights for your film or television project for their country, they are looking at your project and thinking about how can they exploit it in the country. So they might buy a feature film, which they may or may not theatrically release, and then they put it on television, and then they put it on demand, it goes on streaming, etc. They make the decision themselves locally and figure out what they're going to do with your project. But depending on what that is, they will make an offer that relates to a pricing level. And that pricing level can change depending on what's going on in the country just now. So as much as one wants to project these estimates, there are some countries that are very volatile and it's very hard to predict. And even if you sold them, let's say you sold them the license, for example, a Middle Eastern country bought the distribution license for, let's say, your movie project, and turns out 3 months later you're making the movie, everything's in prep, and it takes usually a year to 1.5 years to get these things done. By the time you're ready, now mind you, this person paid a 20% down payment to you when they did the contract, but by the time you're ready, they're basically not able to pay you, even though you have a contract with them. These things actually do happen, and it's sad, but it does happen. What banks do, because they have seen this before, they apply what is called tiers. So they have seen people having either a volatile economy or not paying. When I say people, I really mean distributors from the various countries. So these distributors basically put a mark on their country, and that mark translates into a discount which a bank will apply for any contract coming out of that marketplace. That means that certain countries, let's say Russia or CIS, in this case the Baltics, some Asian countries, some Middle Eastern countries, they're quite volatile, and the bank will put them into a tier 2 territory, which means when you sell your picture to the Middle East and they're giving you $500,000 as a distribution license price, your bank will tell you, that's great, we'll take the contract as collateral and we'll give you $250,000. So they will cut you basically in half. They will apply a 50% discount rate to that country. What's happening right now is that the tier 2 countries, or I should say tier 2 territories, are discounted anywhere from 50 to 60%, I should say. Sometimes even, you have some that are even under 50, but let's put a blended rate together and say it's 50%. And then as it relates to the tier 1 territories, they're usually either not discounted at all, meaning they're paid out at 100%, or they're discounted to, let's say, 90%. That's usually a very healthy kind of range to think about when you put your pre-sales together. Because what happens is, when you've done pre-sales and now you have all these contracts, you have to have someone to pay those for you, so you can use that money to finance your production. And the way to do it is you use a bank to basically cash flow these contracts for you. And what the bank does, they will say, okay, that's a contract from Germany, I'll give you 90% for that, and okay, this is a contract from the Middle East and I'm giving you 50% for that. And so they go through each and every contract and tell you how much they're giving you for that contract. In addition, they're going to charge you an interest fee, which they usually charge up front. So if a bank gives you, let's say, charges you 5% interest per year, and the term is, let's say, 2 years, you're looking at a 10% interest that's going to be deducted from your contract. So in essence, it means your Middle Eastern contract for $500,000 is cut in half, and it's now worth $250,000, and 10% interest is going to be deducted, $25,000 if I'm counting correctly. So you're ending up with $225,000 cash, or I should say available to you at closing of financing, and available to you when you do your production. This is kind of how you think of, what is your pre-sale actually worth to you, and how is it going to become cash so you can fund your project. So as I mentioned earlier, pre-sale financing and bank financing has a cost to it. So here's a finance plan, and we're basically looking at this and saying we have a $10 million budget, 75% is my projected international sales revenue, which is 7.5 million. I will shoot in a tax incentivized production region worth 25%, which is 2.5 million. My pre-sales are 35%, which is 3.5 million. My bank is going to give me 20% as a loan, which is 2 million. I'm going to get some crowdfunding and I'm going to get some in-kind services, together 300,000. So my equity in this scenario would be 1.7 million, which translates to 17%. That's an okay finance plan. So now we look at reality. Because the 35% pre-sales of 3.5 million are actually reducing themselves to 3 million and 30. Is it 3 million 30? Yes, it is. Which all of a sudden increases your equity by 5%. This is just so you understand how discounting and how interest rates affect your net available amount at closing, meaning the money that you have available to actually produce your project. So these banking terms and banking fees and term sheets that you will negotiate with the bank, they do have an effect on what you're going to need for your equity, because that's usually the area where you will increase the funding in order to make up for these costs. Obviously, it's very important when you put together a project that you really understand the risk component. I would actually say mitigating risk is the most important job a producer has. You're going to obviously learn a lot about risk mitigation in this course, but there are a few things that you can do early on to give yourself the best shot. We talked about at some point in our course how important it is to make sure that the rights are actually clean, and clean means there's no issue with the chain of title. There are reporting companies that you should contact, like Dennis Angels. I think I put a link in the course that you can contact in order to see if your project actually has any issues as it relates to the rights. Usually if it's an original story that you either come up with and then you hand over to a writer and he writes it for you, or if it's an original story by a writer who gives it to you, you're the first producer that works on it, then you shouldn't have a problem, but you should always make sure that you check the chain of title for the IP that you're going to get involved in. When you are working on a project, your talent package should always be in support of the value proposition, and the value of your talent package is going to be supported by the sales estimates. So if you have a film that's a certain genre with a certain cast package, you want to make sure that the international sales estimates actually support your package. It could be, for example, that you are attaching an actor who is super hot today and it doesn't mean anything tomorrow. These things happen all the time. So you have to kind of watch it a little bit to make sure that you build in for potential changes when you put your budget together and when you put your finance plan together. It is important to understand that the low-take international distribution projected revenues for you is really your base case. It's not to be seen as a worst-case scenario and then you can just ignore it. It's actually for you to use as your base case, as your healthy kind of medium from which you operate on. And again, you are verifying the demand of a project like yours in the marketplace by establishing pre-sales or having the agent establish pre-sales. By the way, the agent can also give you a minimum guarantee. If he or she doesn't do pre-sales and really believes in your project and says, you know what, I know this is going to work out, I love this so much, I'm going to give you an advance myself, they can do that. In that case, the distribution fee, or I should say the sales fee, is going to go up a little bit, but that's worth it because you don't have to have a bank cash flow your contracts, which might potentially be as expensive, potentially even be more expensive. It certainly takes longer. You always think about free money as an important risk mitigation element in your finance plan, and we're going to talk about various sources of free money, not just tax incentives and in-kind services. There are other free money sources that are available to you, and the more of those you can attach, the higher your profits are going to be. When you put a sales agent on your project, what you want to do first and foremost is make sure that the sales agent is actually bankable. The bank is going to be honest with you and tell you we're okay funding against this guy's estimates, and we're okay funding these pre-sales. Or they might say, well, you know what, we haven't worked with this agent before, we're not comfortable. So you're going to get an answer no matter what, and it's important that whoever you work with, you're going to call a banker and you're going to ask, is this person bankable? We talked about the equity before. Obviously you have the choice in taking as much equity as you want. As you see from previous examples, taking too much equity sometimes bites you in the butt because you are losing profits. So even for you as the producer, it is useful to have equity that is not too high, so you actually can make money, and your cast can make money, and everyone who is supporting you with the project can make money. So it's not only a risk mitigation factor for the equity investor to not be in there for more than 35, maybe 40%, but it's also good for you and your team that the equity investor is not taking too much of the profits in the back end. When you work with a lot of parties, and you're going to work with a lot of parties when putting your project together, you kind of always want to make sure that the pieces you put together kind of fit. You're going to see later when we talk about a waterfall and the recoupment schedule that there is a rule to how these finance elements are put together and where exactly they're plugged into, who recoups when and why. And that's something that you're going to repeat and apply in the finance and other agreements that you're going to be put in place. The completion bond company is someone, or it's obviously not someone, it's a company, but a completion bond company is a good thing and a not so good thing. For me personally, and my investors, and of course the bank, it's great because it protects the budget from overages, which is fantastic. But as a producer, to work with a completion bond company, I can only say sometimes it's a headache, because they're all over you like a rash, and they want to make sure you're not spending obviously their money and you're not going to be an insurance case. The healthy minimum here, or I should say the healthy balance, is advised, and a little bit of patience is advised. And the way to deal with the bond company, which I found usually workable, is when you hire a line producer that they know and love. So you basically can ask them, who do you have, what kind of line producer do you have that can run this project for me? And they have names for you, and then you can talk to these people and work with these people. That's kind of a safe mechanism for you to not give yourself too much headache with the bond company. Obviously, again, it is important to have one, and it is good to have one, but it's not necessarily easy to work with them. Just giving you a heads up. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Earlier on we talked about major studios and how they handle their accounting in-house, and how they don't have anyone like a third party managing revenues that coming in and profits to be distributed. Collection agents is in essence a neutral entity who creates a bank account, and it's that bank account that will collect any and all revenues in relation to the project. Distribution revenues, merchandising revenues, airline rights revenues, any revenues that this project is making from wherever, all over the world, in any platform, is going to go into this one bank account that is managed by this collection agent. So the collection agent collects all the monies, and what he then does is he distributes them in accordance with an agreement. It's called a collection agent management agreement. And that agreement kind of reflects and mirrors all the various agreements that you'd entered into, like your sales agency agreement, your talent agreement, your bank agreement, all your finance agreements, your tax credit lender agreement, your in-kind service agreement, even producers deals. Everything kind of comes together in the collection agent management agreement. Anyone who gets even a penny of profits is going to be finding his way into this agreement, and is therefore sure to actually see profits. It's a very good way to keep everything transparent, because the collection agent issues reports that show exactly how much money was collected, and it shows exactly how much money is paid to whomever for whatever reason. So this is something that investors very much like, because that is their insurance to know that they're actually going to be dealt with in a professional manner, that the revenues are not finding their way on some island and never to them. So there is obviously all these bad stories. So collection agents is one method to avoid any of the bad stories and make investors feel very comfortable. So when we talk about investors, we also should talk about producers, because investor and producer checklists kind of go both ways. When the investor does due diligence on you as the producer, what they're going to look at is obviously your track record. So if you don't have a track record, it's always good to work with an executive producer who has a little bit of a track record that can support your vision and especially make the investor feel warm and fuzzy. But you also have a responsibility to do due diligence on your investor. I cannot tell you how many investors I have met who told me, oh, we're going to have money for you and we're going to pay it on day X, and day X comes and no money shows up. It happens to me more than I like, and it's going to happen to you because it's unfortunately part of this industry. I do not know why there is so much bullshit in this industry, but it is. So investors who pretend to be investors might not always be investors. So therefore, you have a certain way to do due diligence on them. And what you do is you ask them, have you invested in films before? And if you did, what kind of films did you invest in? Let them give you the names of the movies that they have done or TV shows that they have done. And then you're going to research them, and then you're going to call the producer, and then you're going to ask them about this investor. And they either say, oh great, yeah, we really liked working with the guy, or they say, I don't even know who this is, or they say he was a pain in the bum. So you're going to get some feedback in some form, and it's important that you do your due diligence on the investor. And it's also okay to ask an investor for proof of funds. If they have no track record whatsoever in this industry and they want to invest with you, it's your absolute right to say, great idea, show me the money. It's okay to ask that. So don't be shy on this and just ask. Your job as a producer is to give them full disclosure over any and all risk associated with the investment. You have to tell them, dear investor, you can and may lose all your money. It is important that you do that, and you have to, because if you don't, you can get into trouble legally, and if you don't, you're also not professional. The investor is likely not an idiot, and he knows he can lose all his money. If he wouldn't want to lose it, he would probably put it in a bank and just do a savings situation. He knows his money is at risk, so you don't have to be shy in saying your money is at risk. But here is how I'm going to try to mitigate your risk, and then you walk him through all the finance plans elements that you have envisioned for your picture. And even if you don't have them put together yet, meaning that they're not all lined up, you still have an idea of what the finance plan is going to look like based on what you've learned in this class. So you can start from there, and you can walk the investor through the planning of what you're doing, and the deal with the investor can be subject to you reaching those milestones that you have put together. So these if-come deals, they're not bad, because the investor then knows if you have done ABC, he is asked to do D, E, F. So you can do this, and putting a finance plan together as preliminary is perfectly fine. You obviously, when you put your project together, you define exactly the value, and you're also going to define the marketplace that you're aiming for. Investors want to know about this. The investor is going to do some due diligence on the director, and so should you. If the director is someone who has not done anything, that doesn't mean that they don't have talent and that they're not good. But in that case, you need to support this director with a team that is very strong. And you really need the director to work very hard in the sense that they have to do storyboards with you. They really have to be very, very, very prepared in order for you to work with them. And you have to be careful with first-time directors. I have done first-time directors, so I know the good and the bad of it. But if you are a strong producer and you work with the strong producer, you can handle a first-time director and it should be okay. But you need to be very strict with them. If it's an established director, okay too, but then you're going to go do a little due diligence on the movies that they have made and the projects that they have made. Were they good? Were they mediocre? Were there a lot of flops? Where is the director right now in his career, and is that place where he is right now conducive to you? And that research is important that you do it, because your investor is going to do it too. When you do a deal with an investor, you want to align your interest and your rewards. So what that means is, you are giving your investor the chance to recoup before you. He would recoup all his money before you, plus he would recoup a premium before you. This is how you show to the investor you are behind him in the risk and you believe in your project, so you're willing to recoup behind him in the waterfall. They like this. Another thing that you should consider is not to put a huge producer's fee or overhead fee in the budget, which basically pays yourself. It's always a bit of a red flag for investors. They don't want to see that. So try to keep producer's fees and overhead fees low, but what you can do, you can defer them, meaning they would be paid before the investor gets their premium. That will then align the interest. You have basically taking a lower fee to make it happen and for him to invest a lower amount that he then gets paid back. But once he got the amount paid back, this is also the time for you to get paid. So deferments are perfectly fine and they align interests, just as an example. What is a fair investor deal? A fair, obviously investor deals can be all over the place because this is Hollywood, but a fair investor deal is something, for example, if you have an equity investor who provides you with 100% of your budget, which is unlikely, but let's say you're lucky, or I don't know if it's that lucky, but let's pretend, you would give him 50% of the ownership. That should be your maximum. There are investors out there that will ask for more, but this is kind of industry standard, that whatever the investor gives to you in a percentage, half of that percentage would reflect his back end. So if the investor gives you 50% of the budget, his back end should be 25. If he gives you 25% of the budget, his back end should be 12.5. That's kind of the ownership component that you can think of when you use equity investors. Any equity investor is going to ask for 20% premium. That's kind of industry standard. If they ask for more, you should think about it. If they ask for less, that's great. So that's a pretty fair deal. There are various other deals. For example, mezzanine. There is also something called a mezzanine investor, which is, you know, partially equity, partially a loan. We can get into that later. Don't want to overwhelm you right now. And of course, there are even lenders who do senior loans, which is the loan that a bank would give you. There are also private investors who do that, and we can talk about that later too. The advantage to, just quickly, the advantage to use a private investor for what is basically a bank-like loan or a bank position loan, meaning a senior loan, is that the closing process is faster, hopefully, if the investor is not difficult, and you save money in legal fees because bank closings are quite expensive when it comes to legal cost. Milestones. Let's talk about milestones. What that means is, in essence, what I mentioned earlier, you know, this is something that your sales agent needs to do for you so you can do it for the investor. The investor is going to say to you, so here's this $10 million project and you're telling me you can make 7.5 from foreign and we don't know what we're getting from domestic because we don't know how to value domestic, and that's fine. But when am I going to get that money? So if your sales agent didn't tell you when approximately he believes he can get you this money, you're not going to have an answer for your investor, and that's not a good thing. So talk to your agent, let them figure out, you know, what they can do, and then you repeat this information to your investor. Just to give you an idea of what industry standard is, you can tell an investor monies are coming back usually within 12 to 24 months, because that's kind of the time frame that it usually takes to get the project made and to start selling it. Arbitration clause. It is suggested to have an arbitration clause because it is a way to solve legal disputes faster and more cost efficient. It's something to think about, put in your investor agreement. Some investors would like to take on an active role. That's okay if they give you a large amount of money. If the investment that they give you is low, I mean anything under, I should say under 20%, should not involve any kind of active role. Obviously it's up to you how you decide it. I mean, the sword, you know, has two sides. I always try to avoid it, but I also give an investor the I should say, well, the impression is probably a good word for this, that they have an active and decision-making component. What I do is I send them documents where I know they can't do much wrong with it. Like, for example, I have them read the script. What do you think of the script? Oh, interesting. You know, you have conversations with them about their thoughts, and if they're great, maybe they have good ideas, and if not, you find a way to say no. But you can give them certain things to make them feel good, to make them feel involved. But what you should not do is give them any kind of approval rights, no matter how much money they give you. So that's important. And yes, the investor is going to ask you, and you should actually insist on this too. Obviously, they're going to ask you for a completion bond in order to reduce production risk, and you're going to offer this to the investor so he understands if you go over budget, investor doesn't have to worry about it. He's not going to be asked to spend more money. The completion bond company will take on these overages and take on that risk. Investors are going to love this because they always have an absolute nightmare handing over money and then the film doesn't get made. So this is going to avoid this. Investors like to see budgets, and you should share those with them. And they also like to see the budget spent in accordance with the line items in the budget. It's something that the completion bond company is going to make you do anyway, and it's something that you should be doing. So you can always tell your investor, I'm going to have a completion bond company and I'm going to spend the money exactly how it's budgeted. Here, black and white. You will also, you know, gain some brownie points with your investor when you tell them you're going to use collection agents. Most investors haven't even heard of collection agents. So when you explain to them what a collection agent is and what they do, they're going to be very happy. The one thing you need to be very careful with is your master elements, meaning all your film and digital elements. They need to be stored in a very safe place. They need to be stored in a way that you have access to them through either lab access letter or to any other kind of access form. You cannot leave this with a sales agent or with a distributor, which, by the way, they're going to ask for this. So you can say that's fine, but you need to have access to them at any and all times. This is your insurance.